right, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Shout out to all of you for getting here early. It's a beautiful day. Welcome, fellow alumni, students, and industry experts. My name is Renee Lumley Hall. I am a proud graduate of Columbia Business School's class of 2006, and I'm also a board director, I should say, for the African American Alumni Association, also known as 4A. It's my pleasure to open the 7th annual Women's Business Leadership in Tech Conference, Shaping the Future of Tech and Business. Today's program showcases the immense leadership and talent of women in the technology sector, including many of you, our successful alumni. Thank you to Vista Equity Partners and Robert F. Smith, thank you, graduate of the class of 1994, founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners for this 7-year partnership with Columbia Business School. Robert, the impact of your support ensures that the future of technology remains accessible to women, and we thank you for that. Today's program is a testament to the advancements that have been made while we continue to look forward to the future. In this opening session this morning, Robert Smith will moderate a panel with 3 wonderful leaders here. We've got a panel of Vista Partner CEOs building inclusion into tech, focusing on how diverse workforces will create more holistic AI tools. So joining Robert is Shannon Bracken, Senior Vice President of Vista Equity Partners. You're not in order, that's okay. Amy Kadomatsu, CEO of Comply, and Cory Munchbach, CEO of Blue Conic, and the only person who has better shoes than I do today.
As good. Beg to differ.
Well, you come in second. So with that, let's jump right into the panel. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation, but first I've got to give a shout out to my class of 94 classmates and section mates over there. You guys raise your hands, there you are. Class of 93 was okay too. See, that's the way you support your classmates, just so you all know. You come to these things early in the morning. Thanks, y'all, seriously. So before we get into it, I want to set a little bit of context first. You know, when I think about where we are in this cycle, you know, we have, in starting Vista, we started with most of the software companies were on-premise. They were application software businesses. And then we hit this new wave of, we'll call it public cloud. And so that was a major expansion. We had to evolve our strategy to take advantage of what was a more efficient way of developing software, distributing software, consuming software, and created a massive growth opportunity for us. There's a bunch of other little catalytic activities, you know, mobile first that all impacted, but that was kind of the massive wave that came through our market. We're now at another one of those inflection points, and it is the introduction of Gen AI really into all aspects and elements of our world of enterprise software. You all will feel it first in the consumer world, but you're going to feel it most impactfully in the business world, as we will going forward. We have founded and put together a Gen AI Council starting, I guess it's a year ago, where we have about 14 of our CEOs who are focused on various elements of how do we utilize this new technology in developing additional products, services, solutions to our customers and deliver those, in addition to how do we utilize it for forms of creating efficiency in code development. And then, of course, internally within Vista to ensure that we are utilizing these tools for not only communications and engagement with stakeholders in our universe, but also creating efficacy and efficiency in the way we do our underwriting, et cetera. So there are multiple elements and aspects of this, some surrounded by some policy considerations and configuration or compliance configurations. But make no mistake about it, this is going to be and will be one of the most impactful technologies introduced into the business economy for probably the next 20 or 30 years. And the way I like to think about it, the first wave of this will hit the hardware elements, hardware infrastructure, like all technology waves. There's an impact, you know, that we're thinking is maybe 2 to 6 trillion I know it's a big range, but if you depending upon what you include and don't. And then there's going to be a next wave, which is the hyperscalers, which they're starting to express what is their opportunity. They've got a lot of build out to do, but once that happens, they're going to provide a set of products and technologies that will be enabling technologies. And then there's going to be the enterprise software vendors who ultimately will be delivering Gen AI enabled solutions to their customers. You know, the average small to medium and even large corporations not going to develop all these tools themselves. They're going to look for people to deliver these tools to them, and those are their traditional enterprise software vendors. So with that as a bit of a backdrop, let me start with Cory. And Cory, let's talk a little bit about some of the work that you are doing and how you're guiding your team. First, talk a little bit about the company, what it is you're doing, and how you're guiding your team to embrace Gen AI, enable it to be a technology for your customer set, and then ultimately how are you looking to use it to be more efficient in the management of your company?
You bet. Thanks everyone for being here. So BlueConic is a marketing technology platform. So if you think about Salesforce, Adobe, sort of in the biggest enterprise space, we focus on bringing consumer data together for marketing and digital teams to use that data. So you can think about it as sort of a database, very specifically oriented with an application oriented toward marketers. That's important because marketing is absolutely one of the areas that is confronting what does Gen AI mean for us at a very existential level. So we can think about it for our customers in a few ways. How is Gen AI going to be used in their context? So whether that is content scaling, all sorts of, that can be image, copy, right? All those sort of pieces of their day-to-day, but also thinking about, more importantly, I think, the operational efficiencies that come around from that. I don't know that for the folks who are maybe marketers in the room, I've never met a marketer who wasn't told to do more with less. I'm still waiting to find that rare unicorn, and I want to hear everything about it. And so that is both opportunity and threat in a lot of ways for them. And so how do we think about it from a product standpoint is, really, what is the workflow of your day, the jobs that you have, and where can we insert Gen AI into that? So an obvious place is we have all this data. You're creating refined segments, insights. Who should we be going after? One of the questions we've always gotten is, can I have a segment of one? Sure, but do you have enough messages for all million individual people? And up until now, the answer has been, oh no, actually we don't. So I don't need a segment of one, I need a segment of probably 1 million. That starts to flip on its head and really have this opportunity to do kind of true personalization at scale. So those are those big opportunities. And then internally, also working with marketers in the spirit of doing more with less, not necessarily the most adept when it comes to consumer data, right? That's largely been a realm of IT or agencies. So as they've taken that on, that has been operationally difficult. So how do we put tools in to make it easier for them to get started? Faster time to value is a good thing for us. We all know in software that first year is the year. So how do we make sure that they're seeing very quick wins while also setting them up for long-term value with the platform is really critical on the product side. And internally for us, when we think about our whole engagement model, can we cut implementation in half? Can we cut implementation down to 10% of that time? That means fewer people that I need to hire, but we can scale this up much more efficiently. So there's really a ton of places, externally, internally, that we see opportunity to apply this. And we're still in the early stages, of course, but.
I'll tell you, I hosted a conclave meeting this past weekend. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, and you know, one of the CEOs was in that meeting, maybe 35 of us, maybe 30 in that meeting in total, has I'll call it a visual marketing company, and has now implemented Gen AI in the development of products that they're selling to their customers. It's about 80% consumer, 20% on the enterprise. He said that he is now utilizing this for all of his marketing efforts, has reduced the size of his company and people from 350 people down to 32, and it has not changed his growth rate of the company, which is still over 50% year on year. Okay, that's the implications of utilizing, you know, what I'll call this generation of tools today in a marketing environment for a, you know, entrepreneurial company. One of the elements that we all have to think about, of course, as your companies grow is compliance. And Amy, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing. Well, first describe Comply-Side,
Sure.
what you're doing, and how you're looking to implement Gen AI solutions across what is one of the most critical, and in this environment, heavily heavily, well, compliance is increasing because of our economy. But anyway, just if you would, sorry about this early, but if you would, just talk a little bit
Well,
about.
I'll have more coffee soon.
Yeah, I know. I only had 9 cups so far. 8, actually. But if you wouldn't mind, just talk a little bit about Comply-Side, what's actually occurring in our marketplace that is increasing the demand for
Sure.
the product, and what you're doing in leveraging Gen AI.
Fantastic. And again, thank you for inviting me to the stage, and thank you for having me here. So Comply provides compliance technologies to financial services companies in a nutshell. So we provide technology, we provide services and solutions across the financial services marketplace for 7,000 clients globally. And so whether they are large multinational organizations to small SMB wealth providers, you've got a wide variety of organizations who all have compliance needs, and we service them all in different and sundry ways. And you provide education, you provide the kind of regulation which is happening, which you can read in Bloomberg, you can read in the Wall Street Journal, you can see every single day. The SEC, FINRA, et cetera, is really coming down on all of the financial services organizations in different ways. The amount of regulation is just increasing. And marketing in particular is one of the ways, and communications are two of the ways, in which it's becoming very, very complex. And so it's no surprise that those are two areas that are highly of concern to many of our clients today. And so we look at AI, and we've done lots of surveys, because we talk to our clients all the time about how they are thinking about using AI in their daily work. And what's so interesting is that there are ways in which they're using AI or worried about how they're using AI within their organizations and how they're coming to us. So I'll talk about it in a couple of different ways. One is, how are clients using it, and how are they asking us to help them? One of the ways is really in the context of marketing. That's the place where I think a lot of our clients are using it the most, right? So how are they creating marketing materials, and how are they making their marketing better, faster, cheaper, to your point? Mm-hmm. I'll have them come to you. And then number 2 is then, how do they contain AI within their organizations? So governance within their organizations, and how do they contain what they're doing within their organizations, because the policies are so important. Number 2, within our organization, governance, internal, external. So how do we then think about the governance within our organization? We house a lot of very important data within our organization, huge troves of data of our clients. That's super important when you think about financial services organizations and the amount of data that we contain and the kind of care that we have to take with that data and the expectation of the care of that data. It's really important that we cannot allow the public release of that data. And so I think that when we think about how to allow our employees to then use AI, it's really important for us to think about governance first. And so we spent the most amount of time there.
I think that's a good thing, Amy, to kind of double click on a bit. Comply has, critical data from literally tens of thousands of customers. Yes. And companies. How did you, from a policy perspective, look to implement, I'll call it, the walls around this very valuable garden?
Yeah, so bringing in people from all around the organization, including obviously technology, legal. We have dozens of people within the organization who, whether it's our CISO or our CTO, our general counsel, but not just those people, from all around the organization to bring together our AI council to then create the wall around this, and then to determine what are the tools that we're going to put into place to create the ultimate policy. That I think was the initial step to then determine what are the things and tools that we would allow the organization to use. That had to be the first step in the process to then take that forward. And that took a little bit longer than probably people would have wanted ultimately. But
you have to do it right on the front end.
yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you all know there's very little regulatory policy that's written today around utilization of Gen AI, but I will guarantee you it will come, and it will come fast and furious once our bodies in DC are fully educated and informed, I say that in quotes, as to what to do.
But I think that what we see then is a huge amount of opportunity, especially within that middle layer, especially for our own employees, to be able to work faster, to think about how to utilize technology for their own benefit so that we can have efficiency within our own organization. It is, I think we often point to how can we produce products for our clients, but I think really the benefit, and I don't know, Cory, if this is what you see too, is how is it that we do our own business faster, better, leaner, better? And that's where we'll see the biggest bang for our buck today, for sure.
Good. So Shannon is one of our secret weapons at Vista, and you'll hear why in a few minutes. But I think one of the things, Shannon, if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about how you are leading efforts within Vista to not only understand where Gen AI is across our portfolio companies, but how we're going to utilize it internally, and what you believe to be the efficacy and opportunity of utilizing in our underwriting process.
Yeah, so the first, as this technology was evolving, and it's, AI has been around for a very long time. Vista has been engaging with AI. Our portfolio companies have been engaging with AI for a very long time. The evolution of these private and open source models poured an incredible amount of jet fuel on that movement very, very quickly. And so as an organization, the first thing that we did, just from a risk management perspective, was focus on our portfolio companies. So where is their risk? Where is their opportunity? We looked at every single company and effectively sort of charted them. Now, the reality is where there's the most opportunity, there's generally the most risk. And so understanding where our companies were in their maturity curve to innovate and act on this technology was an important first step. So once we sort of understood that, the next step was sort of twofold. One was, how do we incorporate this technology into the value that our companies are delivering to their customers? So that's how you stay in front of the innovation curve. That's how you ensure that from a disruption perspective, you're the disruptor and not the disrupted. And so that's been very important, especially for businesses, candidly, in the front office space that are sort of more sales and marketing focused. We're seeing a lot of disruption there. Call centers, a lot of disruption there. There's some industries that are far more insulated, at least in the medium term. The second pillar of that was, how do we use this to drive efficiency for our organizations and allow them, not just within marketing organizations, but across the whole organization to do, not necessarily more with less, but more with the same. And so a big push there, one of the places we went immediately, was Copilot for our developers. And so, I think the general perspective that we are taking is commercially viable or commercially available products allow you to make progress really quickly. May not be the pieces that unlock the most amount of productivity. Those may take time and more investment and more resources, but there's a lot of things available that you can sort of implement quickly that already have the right levels of security baked into them to actually make progress really quickly. So, our entire portfolio adopted Copilot really within months. We were able to measure and see the impact of that very, very quickly, which then allows our teams to be more innovative or hopefully as innovative as they can be relative to their competitive set. And so that's really the focus on the portfolio, and that's a cross-functional effort at Vista. We have folks from legal, compliance, our value creation team, our investment team, technologists, outside folks that we're bringing in as outside experts, because everyone's learning this sort of real time. And I think in those moments, it's incredibly important to have collaborative efforts. And then at the same time, once we sort of had our arms around our portfolio, which is our the crown jewel of Vista, we then looked internally and said, okay, well, how can we drink our own medicine here and actually adopt and enable ourselves in the same way that we've been engaging with our portfolio about how they should be enabling and adopting the solution. And so I'd say there's a few components of that. One is our underwriting. So how should this change how we identify risks and opportunities and new potential acquisition opportunities? And that comes in the form of, there's certain technology businesses that we probably just won't touch right now. So there's things like web scraping. That feels like it's getting commoditized in this new environment. But then there's also companies where we feel like there's the opportunity to unlock a new and really interesting value set. And that really, from our perspective, hinges on the data that they have available. And that's not just data in the form that maybe Amy was referencing around your customers and where they have their brokerage accounts, but it's also data in terms of the activities that people are doing within your platform, and actually being able to capture that to deliver value back. And so there's some interesting companies that we're evaluating where we think we can actually inflect the growth curve, because there's an opportunity to deliver more value to their customers and then capture more of that from a top line perspective. And so that's really our underwriting, and it's incorporated into our investment committee discussions. It's very top of mind for folks at all levels of the firm. And then there's just the productivity gains. So how can we adopt this technology so that I can do my job more efficiently, that the analysts and associates who work 120 hours a week can do their jobs more efficiently, or maybe they can get a little bit more sleep, one or the other.
Why are you giving them 120 hours? That's,
so
they got half duty now, or what?
And again,
Make a note to self.
That's that's still, I would echo what I said earlier around the sort of crawl, walk, run approach. And so, when we're dealing with public data, so we look at a lot of public companies, I read a lot of earnings transcripts, I read a lot of really boring 10Ks, that's publicly available information. We're going to treat that and experiment with that very differently than we may the private information that we have access to, or some of the proprietary knowledge that Vista has accumulated that's part of our special sauce over 25 years of investing. And so we're trying to approach it where we want to get this technology in the hands of folks as quickly as possible and drive the most amount of productivity gains, but we want to do it in a way that's thoughtful around the actual data that you're working with and the outcomes you're trying to drive.
One of the things we've been talking about here in this forum for, I think, over 7 years, which is why this is set up, is the importance of diversity. And the reason is so we can infuse in everything we do an aperture of understanding that you only get through diversity. I think you're seeing it exhibited, of course, through Shannon, Amy, and Cory in the way they approach our business. But I think it would be important, so I don't want to just focus on that. What I want to focus on is why we do what we do, which is invest in enterprise software, and why this aperture is important. And Cory, I'll turn to you and talk about how you have engaged your teams in delivering an aperture of thought, which is diverse in many respects, which is forward-leaning in many respects, and how do you actually do that from a recruiting perspective, development perspective, so you hear as part of the fabric and not just an instance that we do from time to time episodically. So maybe if we can start there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I particularly benefited from in hindsight is the co-founders of our company were Dutch. And so they moved to the US, to Boston, to found BlueConic in 2014. And so from the very beginning, we had, I was employee 17, we had half American, half Dutch employees. And it was challenging in a lot of ways. And the primary way was like work styles and communications. I've learned to love Dutch direct. I've got a lot
Everyone
of...
but Max Verstappen.
Yeah, that guy I don't like.
Yeah,
we don't,
yeah,
that's
we
a different conversation.
Yeah.
Team Lewis all the way.
Yeah.
Which is, again, that's a form of inclusivity as well, that we can
Absolutely.
support each other's F1 drivers. Look at us go. And so that figuring out communication, and so our founder former CEO who I took over from a year ago, we started with the two of us on what is BlueConic going to look like culturally as an organization. We cannot just be a Dutch company and another half of it is an American company and we figure that out. What that has lent itself to over the years is being incredibly thoughtful about what does it mean to be part of the Blue Crew versus to be a pocket within that. And so one of the most important things about that is creating sort of this culture of belonging within the organization. And so for us, diversity really did start at more of a multicultural level. Now in our office in the Netherlands, more than 45% of the folks there are non-native Dutch speakers. Obviously in the US, we also have a huge amount of diversity. And so being able to start somewhere was really important. And then that is what has led to when we talk about our 6 core corporate values and what that looks like here, a lot of that has to do with cultural awareness, what your background is in, how you communicate, right? And that can be across cultures. Erin Meyer's book, The Culture Map, is a big kind of Bible for us. And I think if you get good at communicating with a lot of different people, you open up this concept of having a broad perspective, different thoughts, being able to support different perspectives and lenses on things in a really healthy, constructive way. And that has turned into a superpower of ours that started with me being like, I can hate working here. You people are mean. Like, why doesn't anyone give positive feedback? What the heck, man? Which literally was how it started. You can ask the guys. It was very uncomfortable. But being super intentional is really what it comes down to. We had those conversations. Bart and I, the last thing I'll say about it was we had a lot of very constructive conflict over the years, sort of the two of us, the management team as well. The most essential piece to being able to have that productive conflict was that we always knew that the other person was taking the perspective of, I think this is what is best for this business. Mm-hmm. So it was not personal, and it got emotional, it got personal, but the seed of why we were having the argument was a disagreement about the best thing for the company. And if we could start from there, that is the place that we can kind of build from. And that has turned into something that works incredibly well for us. Our customers, obviously, we look like our customers, which is incredibly important. Again, I talked about marketing, largely female dominated, enterprise software, largely not. So that is a big competitive differentiator for us as well. So yeah, those are some of the ways that we've thought about it. And it is in recruiting, I will tell you, during the Great Recession or resignation or whatever we were calling it, we got a lot of pressure of like, you all probably saw the influencers on LinkedIn, you know, if you can't hire someone in a week, you know, you're wrong. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. I haven't gotten married after meeting someone in a week, and I'm not gonna hire someone after meeting you in a week. And so staying, I call it urgent but patient. Like, yes, we need the role filled. We need the role filled by the right person who understands why they're coming here. And so that is an area where we've stuck to our guns, even when it's been uncomfortable or we've lost probably good candidates. It's worth it for being and to ensuring that the durability of the culture and what makes us special persists, regardless of if we move people in and out.
I think great leadership tenets. You just put a few nuggets out there. Hopefully you all wrote those down. If not, we'll go to the tape. And maybe let's let Amy talk a little bit about how you are super intentional in driving your organization forward, embracing diversity in your workforce, and embracing it as you involve Gen AI into the fabric of what is now Comply's mission.
100%. And I guess I'll start with stats, right? Because I think that the stats speak for themselves. We have women and people of color at every level of leadership. 50% of the senior leadership are women. 50% of the company are women. Those are the stats.
50% of the world are women. Huh.
Oh my God.
It should look like that.
Holy
right.
shit.
How about that, right?
And we're a financial services reg tech company. How does that happen? Well, it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not just a fluke. It happens because it's the fabric of the organization. But I think that there are a couple of things that we did intentionally. So one is that we have a value which is called respect for flexibility. We made a choice in the context of COVID. And let me tell you, I was not a work from home person back in the day. People, I mean, I've got some people from the office here today, and my husband is here. I was not a work from home person. I did not know how to work from home. I did not have a desk at home that I could work. I was like, I was in the office all the time, but everybody figured out how to work from home. And then I was a not work from the office person. And when I realized that kind of this flexibility for people, and I understood from my team, and we continued to understand from the team how they were working, one of the things that we realized was that this respect for flexibility was super important to the team. And we incorporated that into our values. What that also meant, though, I think, really long term, was that has allowed us to attract people to the organization, and particularly women as an on-ramp to the organization, because it was a signal that we could allow people to have a flexibility within their lives, that it might not be the same kind of financial services organization that they were afraid of, right? And we're not the same kind of organization, in spite of the fact that we are in reg tech, because there's a connotation, there's a fear of financial services, because you read that in the Wall Street Journal, you read that on Bloomberg. And so I think that has allowed us to hire people. That's number one. I don't know, I didn't do the survey of our employees, but the numbers speak for themselves. Number two, I did something that we learned from Vista. We created a HIPPO program. For all of you who don't know what a HIPPO program is, we'll tell you all about it. But basically, we created an on-ramp program through our customer support organization, which was, we will hire you. You don't need to know all the things about financial services. You don't need to know all the things about compliance, because guess what? Nobody knows all the things about compliance. We know already. So we're going to teach you. And by the way, we have on-ramped people from so many different parts of and backgrounds. People who have passed the CCAT, which is an assessment where basically you've got skills, you've got talent and knowledge, but people who have been teachers, people who've been park rangers, people from all walks of life who have been incredibly talented, but we'll give you the training if you have the drive, you have the motivation, you want to come on board, we'll help you come on board to the organization. And they've become incredibly successful. They've had long-term jobs with ComplySide, not just in customer support, by the way. Now they're in customer success, they're in marketing, they are in product, they're in technology, they're all over the organization, and it's just been an amazing success story for us, and I'm just so proud of everywhere that they've gone within our organization, and to our clients, by the way. Our clients have been so happy with them that then they try to steal them, which, I kind of have to be like, okay, you can take them, I guess. Like, we'll try to help them.
You need to sign a long-term contract.
Exactly.
And price increases. And
Yes, a 3 and 10.
Right.
A rule of 13.
You got it. Right. I think so. I mean, Amy just walked through a couple of, again, important aspects of being intentional about building culture in the organization that results in a high-performing organization that is also diverse, right? So I think we have to continue to evolve our thinking around how do you just build it from the ground up and ensure that we are intentional about what our outcomes are going to be, and typically the performance is what you're targeting, and ultimately you end up with a highly diverse organization. I'll hit one point, then I'll turn it to Shannon to talk about how we do our development and our training across our talent pyramids. Just to give you a sense, Amy talked about HIPPO hires, high performance entry level. Just to give you an example, last year, 2023, across the Vista companies, there's about 87 companies as we sit here today until Shannon gets one done next week. But we had 2.4 million people apply for jobs at those companies last year. We tested 489,000 to find a hiring pool of 60,000, which we hired 15,000 people. This is ongoing all the time from all walks of life, 180 geographies, countries, and that is an important part of casting a wide net. I will guarantee very few of them look like what you expect to work at a software company. But what we're able to do is find these talented, motivated people and then identify that they will be successful in our businesses, and then from there we put them into programs that actually accelerate their development. So maybe Shannon, talk a little bit about what you're doing at the portfolio companies, and then how you're thinking about that in terms of driving that into how we're going to adopt AI and that thinking in our AI fabric.
Yeah. So I think on the building of diversity, at least in the financial services industry, you see a lot of stats around the hiring classes. So the percentage of women, the percentage of people of color, the percentage of underrepresented minorities. That was necessary because unfortunately the organizations were so far behind where they should be and still are from a diversity perspective. But to me, that's like 5% of what matters, because if you are hiring diverse classes, but you are not retaining and training and mentoring those people, it's not only not good for those people, but it's not good for your organization. And so much of the focus to me goes on the 5% of the problem. I think, candidly, what attracted me to Vista 10 years ago was that it felt like 95% of the focus was actually on the, what happens once you get here. And I felt the intentionality in every part of my interview process around how they develop talent, or how we develop talent. At the time it was they, now it's we, and really cultivate that talent. It's everything from who we put first-year analysts and associates with in their office, and who we pair them with from a mentorship perspective, which, by the way, is not all women should be mentored by women. There's so much more complexity to how you think about that. Developing that skill set, setting expectations, performance managing, driving accountability, and ultimately creating a culture where everyone feels like they can be successful. And part of that is you need to be able to look up and see a lot of different types of people finding success. And that's, again, it's not just, that there's another woman, I can be successful too. It's, no, there's a man who puts his family first and is very open about that. Like there are tons of different pockets of being able to look up and say, okay, I see these patterns, I think I can be there too. And to Robert's credit, it's been a part of the firm since day one, and you see that, and we have the only female-led. Actually, I guess both of you work with Renee and Rachel. The only female-led technology investing strategy in our Endeavor Fund, and you don't get there overnight. You really have to be intentional about that.
I think we're going to go to questions, so if you can just raise your hands, and I'll try to answer in the order that I see them raised. So we have one in the front as we get you a mic. I think it'll be good, I think, if you can, and maybe Cory, start with you just quickly, things you wish you would have known.
Oh, geez.
We don't
have enough time.
Graduating school, graduating business school, et cetera, that you wish someone would have told you, then.
We don't have time to do that quickly, so I'm going to pick. I didn't go to business school. I was a political science major who is now CEO of a tech company, and there's no linear path to that story. So I'll save that for another time. I think the thing that I wish someone had told me is that you spend a lot of time initially kind of thinking about yourself and how you move up the ladder and put yourself in the right rooms and all of that, which is important, but why you are wanting to be in the room is actually more important. And what I mean by that is when I had sort of the realization that my being in the room I was the first woman at my company. I was the only woman for a very long time. And unfortunately, probably for many of you, if you're going to trailblaze on some of this, you're going to have to get comfortable with being the only of something, if that's the kind of the crusading you want to do. The thing I wish someone had told me is how much infinitely more gratifying it is to represent other people in the room than it is to represent yourself. And I spent a lot of time thinking I needed to be in the room when I made the mindset shift of like, when I get to leave this room and it opened it up so other people came in, that is so much more fun, entertaining, interesting, valuable, and I wish I'd learned that sooner.
Great. Same question, Amy.
So I might not answer your question. I'm going to answer a slightly different question.
Of course you can.
Because I'm a rule breaker, which is to say, when I look back at the pivot I made, so I did investment banking after undergrad, and then I went to business school. It was a very kind of traditional path. Mm-hmm. But the pivot that I made right after undergrad was to go into a startup, and I took a huge risk. I actually made less after business school than I did coming into business school, going into a startup and going into an operating role. And I would tell you that that pivot changed the trajectory of my life and has led me to this path. And it was a meandering path, but led me to become a CPO, a chief product officer, a COO, a president, ultimately a CEO. I would say that risk, that first big risk, that first big step, then allowed me to take the next big risk and be less fearful of the next big risk and the next big risk. And if you are going to be the CEO, you have to be willing to take big risks because you have to make big decisions. And so take that big risk when there aren't that many other things that are relying on you, because when you have a lot of mortgages and children and other kinds of things that maybe are relying on you and are on your shoulders, it's harder to take those risks. I know. So take the risks. Start to take those risks early.
Great.
Love it. Take the risk. Shannon, any thoughts, words of advice for our students in the audience?
And I'm going to go back to your in the room team because I liked it. I think when I started my career, I was very focused on, I'm going to outwork everybody. I'm going to know more things than everybody so that when I'm in the room, I can be the smartest person in the room and like people will have to take me seriously. And I think what I have learned is that the goal is not to be the smartest person in the room. The goal is to surround yourself with people who are much smarter than you. And I think having a beginner's mindset on how you approach all things, once I realized that, you open yourself up to so much more learning and growth and evolution and inclusiveness in terms of the ideas that you are incorporating into how you think about things. And it was we have a women's conference called Miraval, and I remember the moment that I had that aha moment. Probably there were a lot of mentors in my life trying to bang that into me prior to that aha moment, and it just clicked at that point. But it's been really important, not just for I think my own growth, but just my mindset that I bring to problems and the environment I create for the team around me.
My challenge is finding people where she isn't the smartest one in the room. So we had a question here.
So this is for Shannon. You were talking about being in Netherlands and in the United States. So how did you handle the language barrier? Because
Think of it.
It's for me. I got it. It's good.
sorry.
I mean, if you knew Dutch too, I was going to be really excited.
It's okay. We get it. Don't worry. Just ask the question.
So the question I have is, we have a team in the United States and in India. The biggest challenge is we lost an employee who was, when we started AI in the team, we lost him because of his language barrier. And I am in touch with him more as a friend. And he's going to go work for Microsoft Labs now. And I'm thinking, what could I have done better? Because in India, I have always grown up in urban areas, but there are rural areas where people do not speak English. Mm-hmm. So even now, I have employees in my team. When I speak to them in their local language, I can see how smart they are. Mm-hmm. But all the other colleagues at work don't see that. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy is going to leave to or the girl, because they don't see the potential that I see.
Yeah.
And how do
actually,
you-
why don't we, Shannon, you also address a piece of this in terms of how we do it, because you run a multicultural platform.
How do you guys do language barrier and make sure the people see the potential and help them be part of your team when the two people cannot speak the same language? How do you do that?
Yeah, Cory.
So I think candidly, that is also, you need to have a certain framework that, like for us as a small company, we standardized on English. Like we just had to say your English has to be good enough to be able to interact, whether it's with Dutch folks, American folks, British, whatever it might be. In a bigger organization, you might be able to have support. That's a good example of Amy's organization is much bigger and can do maybe more curriculum development than we could when we were early. But I think one of the things is that we've been super intentional about is effectively thinking about that from the standpoint of a learning style. So if you may be also a visual learner, you may be dyslexic, you may have all kinds of other things that make it harder to process language out loud. How do we support that? Whether it is making sure there's written transcripts, documentation. For my Native American, Native English speakers, it is slowing down and being really diligent with those folks to say, you have people who are processing the information and they are processing it, translating it. So you are giving them two cognitive challenges that I might not have. So that is really just a training for managers, training for presenters. How do we give, maybe it's a pre-read for those things. So it's a lot of tactics, but I will also say that it does need to be probably a minimum level of ability to engage on some of that. But yeah, we've been super thoughtful. I totally get it. If we need to have an all hands where folks are getting key points ahead of time, for example, so they've already been kind of primed for the message. That's good for everybody, for the record, but it's definitely good if English is your second language or a third language or whatever the case might be. So tactically, that's how we've tried to address it.
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about our Center of Excellence strategy that we have at Vista. So one of the things that we do at nearly every company that we work with is help them open up centers of excellence. And oftentimes when we have those initial conversations, the feedback is, well, you know, this other company did an offshoring strategy and it didn't work. And it's like, well, we're not talking about an offshoring strategy. We're talking about a Center of Excellence strategy, and they're very different. And the difference is we approach, you know, if you're going to open an office in India, as an example, where we have, you know, hundreds of thousands of folks, you have to treat it as an extension of HQ. And there's a lot that goes into that. It's the folks you hire to manage that office and having real leadership in place. It's making sure that your CEO and other leaders are spending real amounts of time there. It's building development and career pathing infrastructure there, not just, you know, hey, you're here to do this job in this box, and then once you've outgrown that, you're going to have to go somewhere else, which I think a lot of other offshoring, a lot of offshoring strategies take that mindset. I mean, even small things like you're not just going to do the boring code. You're not just going to do tech debt. You're going to work on innovation. You're going to be sharing in the fabric of being part of the strategy that the organization is driving. I think honestly, one of the most impactful things is just getting people to spend time together. It really does make a difference when you can fully understand the cultural perspective that somebody's bringing, why they are who they are, why they may, you know, be more quiet or more loud or whatever it might be. But there's a ton of nuance to it.
Karen, we had a question over here.
Yep. Hi there.
Hi.
Great to see you all. Question about Gen AI and getting companies to embrace it a bit more and to overcome some of the obstacles that I think are amplified in the media. Was just working on a huge deal with a major retailer who had created a Gen AI council, which I think a lot of companies are doing, a COE, a way to evaluate the Gen AI opportunity across a lot of different product areas. But this particular company, the council sort of came apart as the result of a reorg, and now there's a lot of reluctance to embrace the technology, and I imagine that happens across other companies, so I wanted to know how you guys are dealing with that.
And so is the question how to put back together the AI Council, or to?
I guess it's more coaching companies to take risks when it comes to Gen AI.
I mean, because we get to work with 87 companies, I mentioned Copilot as an example. It's becoming sort of a household name, at least within technology in the world that I live in. But there were still many companies that had tremendous amounts of pushback around adopting it. And so we had companies that had adopted it and we didn't even know it. They were like in the pilot program. And then we had some where it was a multi-week, multi-month conversation around the adoption. The approach we've taken in many cases is to start small. Pilot this with five developers. You're not comfortable with 10, let's start with 5. Not comfortable with 5, let's start with 1. And that has actually, again, we have a lot of resources around legal and compliance, and so we can actually, it's probably not dissimilar to how you all train your sales people, right? Of kind of identifying what is the point of concern, because there's some concern that's just like hesitance to change. Like, I don't want to do this. What if one day this costs me my job? That's a real emotional reaction a lot of people are having to AI. And so my advice would be start small and start where the reputation of whatever it is that you're embedding is relatively proven. And obviously nothing is super proven right now, but relatively proven. Microsoft, for example, Salesforce, they all have AI related tools to kind of get people over the hump.
Right. I do think that it's kind of to pinpoint an area of pain. So I think in the GitHub Copilot example, I think when you talk to developers and you then pitch the idea of, in our case, it was like, hey, it can write your test cases for you. Developers were like, sign me up. I don't like that. So when so you have to think about what's the pitch, right? What's the pain point and what's the pitch? How do you think about the ROI to the end constituent, and how do you then create the POC that's going to be appropriate for the organization in order to then get something out the door. But that's really the question ultimately, and I think starting small and then trying to build on that success.
By the way, I think that in this movement specifically, there are going to be some pockets where being the second mover is actually the right move for folks. Mm-hmm. There's some pockets where first mover, let's go, let's move. There's some pockets where it may make sense to kind of watch and see, have a little bit of a different risk appetite. Maybe you're a smaller organization, you have less resources to bear than other organizations in terms of thinking through some of these problems or adoption. And I guarantee 2.0 versions of all of these are going to be a lot better than 1.0. And so you probably don't end up losing a lot of time, but it's balancing that bias to action with sort of watching and learning.
Yeah, I would say this is one that you can probably, and I'll say wait in some respect for the second wave, but do not stick your head in the sand and ignore that the wave is coming. Because this will be he or she who gets there first will be the only who gets there in certain industries. And that is a true dynamic that you need to be aware of. Green suit, black dress, front row, Roscoe. Okay, so here we go.
Good morning.
My name is Gracie. So the question just for anyone on the panel, I guess, as you're adopting Gen AI into your companies, and you obviously have proprietary data, how are you thinking about managing risk? How are you thinking about managing risk and, I guess, just protecting your downside as you're putting all this sensitive company information? And just for fact, my name is Owen Odija. I'm a CBS alum of 22 and SEPA alum of 23. Thank you.
Great. Can you pass the mic? Go ahead.
So I'll say the category of technology you're in is a customer data platform. So all of our customers are putting their consumers' data into BlueConic. So there is not even a discussion that data goes into any models at this time. Full stop, end of conversation. So for us, we're thinking about the places where Shannon mentioned earlier, sort of the assessment of like disruption. For marketing, it's the front end stuff. On the data side, it's not. And so protecting that is a second wave kind of conversation, which by the way, the Coming Wave book is excellent on this topic, second side note. So that data is not being touched. So we're focusing on some of that front end type of opportunity, the kind of more content and those types of marketing. And then the disproportionate impact for us right now is still in the company, is figuring out the operational efficiencies for ourselves, because we have enough customers having a hard time figuring out how they navigate GDPR and CCPA and all of these kind of other guidelines and regulations. The introduction of this for us is not, there is no upside at this time. But as we look for the product going forward, it's then incorporating Gen AI into our own product so that we have control over that. Whereas we will not, no world in which that data goes out of there. And so that's also kind of figuring out in your own organization, what are the types of data that you are dealing with? And that's where, coming back to what Amy said before, governance and change management, right? Take Gen AI out of this, and it's a really boring old school leadership question around governance, change management, outcomes that you seek, and needing to make sure you've got that infrastructure in place for something frothy like Gen AI, or something way less so.
Okay, black dress. I've got 2-minute warning, so I'm going to try to get
okay.
questions.
Hi, I'm Farah. I'm a CBS alum, class of 2011. I have my classmates here with me as well. I actually run strategy at AWS, and so very bathed and deep into the Gen AI revolution. Just wanted to test a thesis with this group here. Our thesis is that we focus on the computing capability, like the chips, et cetera, and the large language models, which we've talked about here a little bit because, the models tend to be very different wherever they are. And our thesis is, at the end of the day, there's really only going to be 5 to 10 models that work pretty much for everyone. And then we go on to the applications, for example, ChatGPT, Copilot, et cetera. As you're thinking about your portfolio companies and your individual businesses, where do you think is the highest exponential value in this sort of value chain? Because we think of it as a value chain proposition rather than creating the next ChatGPT or the next, NVIDIA.
Yeah, I'll hit that quickly. From our perspective, I think your presupposition is correct. There will likely be a dozen or so of these LLMs that will prove effective, and that's enough. And so they're going to see a bunch grow and die, and then a few that proliferate in the consumer business. In the enterprise segment, we have these walled gardens. And so I talked with Andy and your teams about, okay, how are we going to utilize these walled gardens that we have now 87 going to 200 of them with unique customer information, data that we've created as it's gone through our workflow, and create some form of model. And it may not be a large language model. You may not need that. In some cases, it's a small language model because of the defined nature of this garden, and use that to now create products and solutions and services that serve that unique product set, that unique customer base. And we think that's going to be ultimately what is the long-term economic rent capture for the businesses that we buy, selling to their customers. We end up being a wholesaler, if you think about it, of the AWSs, Karen's with Google, who's sitting right to your competitors to your right. You've got Oracle coming from the back end. You now have 3 or 4 hyperscalers that are going to emerge that are sovereign in nature, who are looking to provide that same sort of compute and GPU capacity into the theaters. So that all is going to go through that series of waves. You're going to see the hardware vendors capture a bunch, and then we're going to say, guess what? We only need ASICs to do the kind of stuff that we need, and that's going to create a whole nother dynamic. And that is the fun of our world and the fun of the business we get to be in. But your presupposition is correct. But ultimately, in the enterprise world, there will be definitions around who the customer set is, where that data resides, who has the sovereignty and dominion of that data, and what model is actually being applied across that data set. Roscoe, you had a question.
Yes, sir. Robert Ross, class of 94. Robert,
Greatest class in the history of CBS. But anyway, go ahead.
certainly the best looking.
Yeah, no question.
Thanks, mate. So, Robert, something you said earlier really resonated here. So here's my question for the panel is, Robert, you said regulation of Gen AI is coming, like it or not. So be ready. I am curious about two things. One is, I hope that social media is not a model for how we're going to regulate Gen AI, for some obvious reasons. It places, to me, the Gen AI places certain individuals and communities at very heightened risk. There's some obvious communities that I think I'm referring to. And it strikes me that your approach, the approach of every person on the panel here, toward an intentional culture has the potential to help us create a framework for this regulation. And so I'm curious about what you think about that framework might look like, and can you at Vista and your related parties, can you help us create a framework that will work for us all?
Yeah. Thoughts, commentary?
It's a great question. I mean, I think this is the tension. We talked. I think the panel title has something about leadership in it. Like this, for me, is a question of leadership in a very real way, and balancing growth and the sort of top line. We need to make a profit and be a core business and all the sort of standard with. Maybe there are trade-offs to that. Maybe we need to find a couple of percentage points of growth that are instead allocated toward moving slower or more thoughtfully. And I think that is part of the framework, is where are the trade-offs. And I couldn't share your sentiment more that we are reckoning kind of ironically, I think right now, with the evidence of what happens when we don't take a thoughtful, internally or externally regulated approach and trying to deal with the consequences when it's far too late, at the same time as we are seemingly poised to make exactly the same mistake faster with generative AI. And so on the one hand, that's a little depressing. On the other, the fact that we have the so obvious big opportunity to compare and contrast, let's not do this again, could serve as a really effective forcing mechanism to do that, because we know what it looks like when we don't. But it is a leadership question for sure.
Amy?
Yeah, I think, because we and our client base is within the financial services landscape, and the monitoring that we do of our clients and their employees, I think that there is an opportunity for us to think about how to use our leadership within this, to think about even the AI tools within it, to help lead the way. But I think that will also be part of that next generation of thinking about when you piece together bad actors within organizations as they do exist. I think that the vast majority of people within organizations are good actors and have good intent, but we're also, I think, always looking out to try to figure out who the bad apples and the bad actors are. And that's what we'll always try to help to look out for.
I think as consumers,
Shannon?
you can also, consumers at the consumer level, but also consumers of this technology as business consumers, like you can and should play a big role in this. So for example, every company that is related to AI should have a code of ethics or a code of conduct that is made available to the people that use that product. And it should tell you what data they use, how they approach it, their philosophies around it. And if they don't have it, don't engage with them, demand it. Because I think that is part of what will drive this forward. And I think we've said the word intentionality a lot. I think that, to me, that is the key word here, being intentional about it and also understanding that it is going to evolve and change. And so it can't just be something that gets put on the wall and then walked away from. I think it needs to be continuously revisited from, a lot of the smart people that are thinking about this. I mean, we didn't talk at all today about the biases that have been identified within these technologies, right? Like that is a real problem with this technology. You have to have intentionality around understanding that and knowing how it impacts what you're doing and the outcomes that you're driving.
Yeah.
So you see why my job is so great. I get to work with such great senior executives in this complex, ever-changing, and dynamic world. So thank you all very much for being a part of this.
Wow. We could go on and on all morning. This was fantastic. Thank you so very much. A couple of takeaways. Here are the things that I synthesized from this talk. Lots of leadership lessons, but also technology lessons, right? Like this is the reason we're here today. Do more with less, but be prepared to do more with the same. Go big and go scary. Have a beginner's mindset, and the regulators are coming. Thank you, Robert, Shannon, Amy, and Cory. We'll now take a quick break, and the next session will begin shortly. So stay tuned. Thanks.